This week is Parshas Vayetze, and the topic we will be discussing today is Shiur Poyalim, the story between Yaakov Avinu and Lavan, and the sugya is the relationship between an employer and his employees, focusing on the story of this week's Parsha. The Rambam writes in the very last halacha in Hilchos Shiur, Perek Yud Gimel Halacha Zayin, and the Rambam is quoted both in the Tur and in the Shulchan Aruch Choshe Mishpat, Shin Lamed Zayin, Sif Chaf. And I'm reading the Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch, which actually is the Lashon of the Rambam. Muzar HaPoyel, שלא יבטל מעט כאן ומעט כאן, אלא חייב לדקדק על עצמו בזמן. When the Rambam writes this halacha, the Rambam gives an additional nuance. It is not only the balabayis, the employer, that needs to be honest, caring, conscientious in his relationship with his workers, employees. Same goes for them. ומוזר הפועל שלא יבטל מעט כאן ומעט כאן, אלא חייב לדקדק על עצמו בזמן שהרי הקפידו על ברוך הרביעי של ברכת המאזן שלא יבורך איסו. The kavon is a gemor in Brochas Tezayin. Employers working for another person or a company, when they say Berchas Hamazon, they're potter from Brocha Revius. Fourth Brocha in Berchas Hamazon is only midirabonan. And Chazal exempted a worker from that brocha, which proves how honest, serious an employer needs to be on his job. How long does it take to say brocha revius? Not more than a few moments. Would it take a minute or less? V'afar piken, potu. And that proves that you need to dedicate all your time on the job to your work. How far does this go? Menig Hamadina. Sometimes I am asked by people, so could I make a phone call? Could I call my wife and ask whether everything is okay? My baby had a fever this morning. Could I call her and say, could I make a short phone call? Yes. Because at the end of the day, these halachas says, Hakol keminig Medina. But you need to be serious, and you need to minimize any other activity. So, Abba Chelkio, Tori is told, and Tanis Daf Chav Gimel, the Chachomim came to visit him, they said, Shalom Aleichem, and he didn't respond. And then they asked him, how come you didn't even respond? And he said, I was working. I was on the job. That is Midas Chasidis. That is taking this ethical value to the extreme. But this is a klal. Chayev ledaktek atzmai bizman. And the Rambam goes on and the Shulchan Aruch goes on. V'chein chayev elavid bekol koichoi. It is not only quantity, but quality. It is not only working your full hours, it is also doing your best. וכן חייב לעבוד בכל כוחי, שהרי ינקוי וצדק אומר, כי בכל כוחי עבדתי אסביכן. לפיכך נוטל זכורי אף בי עולם הזה שנאמר, ויפרצו איש מאויד מאויד. So this halacha is learned from this week's Parsha, ואתנו ידעתן כי בכל כוחי עבדתי אסביכם. So the Rambam quotes Yaakov Tzadik. We all are familiar with Yosef Tzadik. Tzadik Yesad Olam b'midas hayesod. Yaakov Tzadik is usually not the Yaakov's title. I think it's only once that the Rambam defines Yaakov Tzadik, and that is in Mominus. Bekol koichi avadati yisavichan. Lefichach notel schori abi al mazeh shalem v'yifretz wish moed moed. People are looking for zgulas for Ashiras. So many people, thousands of people say Parshas Haman every day in the morning, and many of them say Parshas Haman from parchment, from cloth. So one of the zgulas is, be honest on your job. Work your fullest. Dedicate the full amount of time you're on the job, and do your best. Chayev lavid b'kol koichei. So one would ask, how do we learn from Yankov? Maybe it's a real midas chasidus, the Avos Hekdoshim or the Avos Hekdoshim. Maybe it's not a chiyuv, like Abba Chelkio. Abba Chelkio definitely took it to the extreme. He was on the job and he didn't say Alecha Masholem Techachmi Yisrael. That's an interesting question. But I think the answer is, so we are supposed to emulate the ways of the Avos. So whatever the Torah tells us about Masei Avos is incumbent upon us. That is the nature, and that is what is special about Masei Avos. It is from them that we learn. It is them that we emulate, and therefore, if the Torah tells what Yaakov Avinu told, that is a halacha, because it is from the Avos that we learn. So that would be my understanding. So coming back to the Reisha, the Tur adds on another word. This says that the Torah says that a poel, an employer, an employee, is not only potter from Brocha Revius, is also potter from Bechas Azimun. And that is an additional Chiddush. But if the source is the Rambam, and we don't find that in the Rambam, why would the Torah add it on? So the understanding of the Levush is, when the Torah writes Bechas Azimun, it actually means Bechas Amazon. And he adds nothing on to the Rambam. The command of the Torah is, Shalei beberches Amazon diktuk chachomim, and they pattered the poel from Brocha Revius. But the Sma's understanding is, he is also put on Bechas Azimun. And that's a Chiddush al Gabe Chiddush, because Bechas Azimun takes even less time than Brocha Revius. Rabbi Yisrael ever mentioned, it takes a few seconds. Reb Shloime Kluger makes somewhat of a compromise. Chachma Shloime and Choshe Mishpat. Reb Shloime Kluger says it depends. If all three poyalim finished their meal together and they're all ready to say Bechas Hamazon, of course they're chayiv bezimun. But if one finished before the others, and the question is, am I supposed to wait till my two friends finish their meal in order to say Bechas Hamazon? That is what the Tur means, and that is what the Sma means. No. You finished eating, you bench, back to the job. And you're not entitled, because of Bechas Hamazon, to wait till your friends will finish their meals. So number one, we learn from Yankov Avinu, and there's another Gemara as well in both Metziat Tzadi Gimel and Beis, Ad Heichan Shoyme Socher, and we learn from Yankov Avinu, another posting in this week's parsha, that Yankov says, V'chalani chorev, I worked so hard in winter, in summer, I was in the rain, I was in the heat, and it's from the Yankov Avinu that we want to learn, and then also in Dinei Shoymrim, Shoyme Socher, how hard does he need to work? There's another posuk in this week's parsha, and an interesting comment of the Malbim, and we're still in Hilchos Poyalim, Schirus Poyalim. Employee, employer. Loven tells Yaakov, Hachi ochi ato va'avadetani chinom, hagidu li ma maskurtecha. The Malbim makes an interesting comment. A worker that starts on the job without clearly stipulating, without a clear agreement, what his wages are. So how much would he get paid? Hakol k'minig Medina. Says the Malbim, however, if your employer is your relative, then maybe the worker, the employee, has a right to say, I assumed you're going to pay me more than you would pay anyone else. After all, we're relatives. And that is why Lovan is afraid that Yaakov will take advantage of the fact that we're b'nei mishpacha, we're family. And that is why he says, I want to know, what do you demand? And let's sign a contract. I don't think the Malbim actually means to be a machadash halacha that a person that's working for a relative deserves to get more pay. This is not a halacha we find anywhere. Mishnah, Gemara, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, Rishonim, no one says it, and it also doesn't make sense. If the worker would say, I thought you were going to give me more money because we're relatives, the employer could say, I thought you were going to demand less money, and I thought you were going to be happy to help me out in my parnasa. I think the Malbim just means a general comment based on what people might assume. After all, we're trying to get into the head of Loven Arami. But what is correct is what the Malbim says. If there was no clear decision, a contract, an agreement, what the workers' wages would be, Hakol Keminig HaMedina. However, when there is no clear minhag, this is a huge discussion in the Poskim. Seems to be a contradiction between two sugis in Bava Metzia and two seifim in Shulchan Aruch, which is interesting. So, this is a very common metzius in Botei Din, and we had many tikim, many cases in which there was some lack of clarity, some confusion regarding the wages that an employer needs to pay his workers, his employees. One special case, which is really strange, was a person put an ad in the Haredi newspapers in Israel that were looking for a girl that would be willing to sleep every night with an elderly woman. So they couldn't expect a married woman to do it because she needs to be with her family, with her husband. But the idea was a girl that's studying in seminary, and she might not live in Yerushalayim, and she's in the dorm. Maybe she would be happy to make some extra money and sleep with an elderly woman. So the ad said, we need a girl, seminary girl, that would be willing to come every night and sleep with this woman for 50 shekel. And a girl, yes, applied, and the family liked her. Her seminary was 45-minute drive to the house of that woman. And she came every night. She spent an hour and a half on the road. At the end of the month, she gets paid a dismal sum, and she is in shock. And the family says, what we meant was 50 shekel for a night. And the girl was, what are you, out of your mind? 50 shekel for all night? Including an hour and a half that I'm on the road just to get here and to get back to seminary? To me, it was pushed that it's 50 shekel for an hour, not 50 shekel for a night. And that came to Beis Din. So even before talking about the sources, the psak was that he pays 50 shekel an hour. However, recommended because we don't think there was any bad intent. It was really a misunderstanding. So we recommended somewhat of a pshora. I think we said she should get 40 shekel an hour or somewhat. So this brings us to the fundamental question. Ayin Vav in Masechet Bava Metzia. We learn in the Mishnah and in the Gemara. Person offered Gimel. I don't know what Gimel. He ordered $30 an hour for a poem to do a job. But he didn't speak directly with the workers. There was a middleman, an intermediate, and he was actually one of the workers. And he was the go-between between the employer and the other workers. So the employer offered $30. He lied to the workers and he said, you're going to get $40. But you're not working for me. You're working for him, and he is the one that's paying me, not paying you, not me. So they worked a month, like that seminary girl. At the end of the month, the boss says, okay, $30 an hour, and they protest. We were told 40. The balabayas asks the shliach, the middleman, did I say 30 or 40? And he admits, you said 30. I, on my own, hoped maybe you'll agree. I told them they're going to get 40. So the Mishnah says, the balabayas, the employer, doesn't need to pay more than 30 because that is what he promised. The workers will only get 30. The shaliach, the middleman, does not need to compensate them because he's stressed. It's not me. You're not working for me, you're working for him. Ve'ein lehem olav elo taroimis. Soon we'll talk about what is the concept of taroimis. But first, let's discuss the sugya. So the Gemara is clear. Why does he need to pay 30? Not because he promised 30. He actually didn't promise them anything. Because there was never any direct contact between the employer and his workers. They didn't sign, they didn't even talk. So the fact that he told the middleman, I'm going to pay 30, is not really relevant. Because he didn't convey that sum. He lied to them, they're going to get 40. So what is binding the balabayas to pay even 30? Minag hamadina. But the Rishonim say, if there would be no minag hamadina, some people pay 40, some 30, some less than 30, then they would only get the minimal fee. And that is the halacha that we learn in Siman Shin Lamed Beis. So this halacha is discussed in the beginning of Siman Shin Lamed Beis. See, follow the first sifa. No, that was Shin Lamed Aleph. Omer Ashlichat Seves Choyli Poyalim Bishloisha V'Honach V'Schoron Ba'arba. However, and then the Shulchan Aruch goes on and says, so he pays the minimal fee. That's the Psak of Shulchan Aruch, and that is what we learn in the Rishonim. Daf Ayin Vav. Daf Pei Zayin, there's another halacha. Person rented Poyalim, and there was a direct contact and agreement between the employer and his workers and the employees, that he told them, Scharchem kishnayim oishloisho mibneu iyom. I'll pay you like 2 or 3 other workers in our town. So they didn't talk about a definitive sum, dollars and cents, but like 2 or 3 workers. Machlokes the Bishua and Chachamim. Bishua says he pays minimal fee. Chachamim mishamnin beinayim. Rashi explains, statistically, we need to do a market evaluation. So if some workers get 5, another gets 3, then he will pay 4, which is average. So what is the difference between these 2 cases? Seems to be a machlokes and a shainim. The Ritva says he pays the average price only because he said 2 or 3. What is the mishmos of 2 or 3? If he had a mind to pay the minimal price, then he would say minimum. When a person says 2 or 3, it means we need to check out the market. And obviously, between 2 and 3, that is what he needs to pay. That's the approach of the Ritva. So according to the Ritva, in any other scenario in which it is a matter of doubt, a suffix, how much he took upon himself to pay, we would say minimum. Is that because Amoitzi Mechaveroi Olav Haraya? The Rif of Memvov and Dape Rif and Bava Metzia has another explanation, and the Rif says, we always assume that an employer wants to pay as little as he could get away with. And therefore, it is upon the worker to stipulate, I want this to be my sachar, my wages. Not because there's a suffix and we say, but rather because that is the nature of people. La'olam datei shel odam atar zulo. And therefore we cannot impose on the employer to pay more than we assume he had in mind. So according to the Ritva, any other suffix we say, minimal fees. Only because he said Shnayim v'Shloisha. That does not appear to be the opinion of the Ramban. And the Ramban learns from our case that in any other suffix, you pay the average of the market value. And the Ramban is Medame, compares Chidas Poelim to Mekach Umemkar. You bought an object, and it is not clear what was the price we agreed upon. We check the market, and you pay the average. That is the opinion of the Ramban. And that is based on Bov Metzia Peizayin, Shin Lamed Aleph Siv Gimel. How would the Ramban explain the difference between Shin Lamed Beis Sif Aleph, the Gemara and Daf Ayin Vav? Sma Sif Koten Gimel says there's a difference. And what is unique, what is different about Daf Ayin Vav is because there was no direct agreement or contact between the employer and employees. And the psika that they did get is totally void, totally invalid, because the shliach lied. It is as if they started working with no psika, with no agreement. And that is when we say an employer would pay as little as possible, the minimum he could get away with. It is on the shliach that had to stipulate, this is what I want to be paid. And then the Sma asks, but in our case, they did stipulate. There was a clear agreement. So why should they lose out? Why would we say Yodam ala Tachtoino? They were promised 4, not 3. Says the Sma, but because the middleman emphasized, don't come to me. It's not I that need to pay, it's he. Then we would expect them to talk directly with the boss, bearing in mind and hearing from the shaliach, he's the one to pay you. Don't come to me. And that is why they should have stipulated and spoken to their direct employer, not to the middleman. And that is why they would only get a minimal fee. So actually, it's a machlokes Ramban and Ritva. Any suffix regarding the sum that an employer deserves to get paid, according to Ramban, average, according to Ritva, minimal fee. It is only Shnayim or Shloisha that is different. Chuvas Marashdam, Shin Lamed Hecho Shemishpot, strongly leans towards the opinion of the Ramban. But then at the end of the Tshuva he writes, it's Dina Momenis, Yef Shalahoitzi. So the halacha is actually in accordance to the Ritva. In any doubt, it is not the average, but the minimal fee that the poil will get. K'tzois HaChoshen Shin Lamed Aleph Sif Koten Gimel seems to understand that there's no machlokes between the Ramban and the Ritva at all. And his fundamental understanding is that, same, even though when we analyze and learn the Ramban and Ritva, it seems to be clear that there is a machlokes. So in the case that I mentioned about the girl that came every night to be with that old woman for 50 shekel, the reason our psak was fundamentally he can't get away with 50 shekel for a night. First of all, that is ridiculous, totally unacceptable. It is so far from what is considered average or minhag Medina. And also because the nature of this job goes by the hour. Like a babysitter is usually paid by the hour. And if you don't have a steady job with wages, usually whenever we need to structure a payment plan, it would go by the hour. Especially in a case like the one we dealt with by the nature of things. One night you might come a bit later and then a bit earlier, and sometimes the family will be spending time with her elderly mother, and she doesn't need to be around, and sometimes the lady will get up earlier, get up later, till others come to step in, and therefore it is reasonable that the agreement should have been, or actually was, based on payment per hour. And that is why that was our psak, but we did recommend a certain level of pshara. I would like to briefly address the concept of taraimis. So the shliach lied. He promised them 4, but Abayis had no intention of paying them 4. And because he told the workers, you're not working for me, you're working for him, ein lahem elo taraimis. Is taraimis a halachic concept? Teferes Yisrael HaMishnayis, first Mishnah, Perek Vav, Mesechet Vav Metzia says, taraimis does not oblige the person that did something wrong to pay, even not L'tzeis Yedei Shemayim. However, our generation was zeichet to an abundance of new Sforim Mikis V'Yad, and we have a Sefer above Metzia from Talmud HaRashba, and he says, Midas Chasidus, the Shliach should pay. He's the one that lied. He's the one that caused loss to the workers. Therefore, Midas Chasidus, he should pay. Is there a contradiction between Talmud and Ashba and Teferes Yisrael? I don't think so. I wrote a major kuntras about various different concepts, in essence, and different levels of chiyuvim that cannot be enforced in Beis Din. And let me just briefly mention the concepts. Chayev b'dinei shamayim, chayev l'tzeis yedei shamayim. Are these two concepts the same? I argued no. Chayev b'dinei shamayim is a higher level of chayev than chayev l'tzeis yedei shamayim. Usually Chazal don't even use the terminology chayev l'tzeis shamayim, but bebo l'tzeis yedei shamayim. And therefore, notion of chiyuv b'din shamayim is a higher level of chiyuv than l'tzeis yedei shamayim. Where does lefnim meshuras adin fit in? A lesser chiyuv than l'tzeis yedei shamayim. And I think when Chazal say lefnim meshuras adin, it is lefnim meshuras every din. It is also lefnim meshuras din shamayim, not only lefnim meshuras din Beis Din. And I brought Toises. Toises says there are 3 different types, 3 different concepts, 3 different levels of lefnim meshuras adin. So we already have 5. Din shamayim, l'tzeis yedei shamayim, and 3 levels of lefnim meshuras adin. Number 6 is Midas Chasidus, which is a lesser chiyuv than lefnim meshuras adin. Midas Chasidus is only for the very special Chasidim v'Anshe Ma'aseh. Number 7 is Ruach HaChomim Noicha Heimeno. And that is the last Mishnah Mesechet Shvius. Hamach Zechoy B'Shvius, Hamakayim es Devorav Ruach HaChomim Noicha Heimeno. And Chazal always use very precise and exact definitions. Midas Chasidus says, we recommend you to pay. Midas Ruach HaChomim Noicha Heimeno is not even, we don't urge you to pay. We don't recommend that you pay. But if you do pay, the Chachamim are proud of you. And that is the lesser chiyuv of all the Gedorim of Tashlumin, which are not enforceable in Beis Din. So there are 7 3 levels. Talmud HaRashba says, chayiv only Midas Chasidus. And he definitely could agree with it. First you saw there is no chiyuv l'tzeis yedei shamayim. Rabbi Saul Salanter is quoted, the concept of taraimis is you have the right to be angry. You have the right to feel hurt. Some soifer before Rabbi Saul Salanter, Chedushim bo Metzia daf ayin vav, mutaloi lehisraim. So Salanter uses the words mutaloi lehakpid. And I don't really understand. Do you need a heter to have taraimis? Is it an isser? What is the isser to have a kapeda on a person? To feel hurt. I don't hate him. It's not like sisters achichu belvavcho. I feel hurt. Do I need permission to feel hurt? What is the manifestation? Marshag goes to the extreme. The Marshag is one of the greatest Gedolim in Hungary, a Talmud of the Maram Shik, Chele Gimel Simenun Gimel, and he says, when Chachomim say, you have the right to have teroimis, you are allowed to take revenge. There is no Isav Nekima Venatira, and that doesn't make sense. This is a lav, loisikim veloitito. What's the heter if he's not chiyuv l'shalem? If he has no chiyuv to compensate, how could I hurt him? There is a Rashi in Bo Metzia Nun Beis Amid Beis, and that is a different sugi of teroimis. But there, once again, we find in the Mishnah the Lashon of teroimis. And Rashi says, it's a discussion in the Gemara, Lo mi Yisrael of v'yoytzi di bosoi. And Rabbi Yankov Roy wants to prove from this Rashi in a Sefer Pischei Choshen that when you have teroimis, you are allowed to express your feelings and even berabim and embarrass that person. I don't think it's a raya from Rashi. First of all, there is no real necessity to define teroimis in various different sugyas in the same way. So what I think, when a person has the right to have teroimis, not only has the right to be makpid, he also has the right to tell the other party, you hurt me, and I really have bad feelings about it. But my basic understanding is teroimis is not about the victim. It's about the perpetuator. And when the Gemara or the Mishnah says, Yesh lo of teroimis, it means that you are doing something wrong. You don't bear monetary liability, but this is wrong, and you're doing an avila. And a good Jew should stay away from wrongdoing. So teroimis is not so much the right of the victim. Person doesn't need permission to have a peda on another. But when Chazal say, Yesh lo yorav teroimis, what they mean to say is, you don't bear responsibility and basin, but that doesn't mean you're a tzaddik. You are do something very wrong. And that is wherever we find the concept of teroimis. So when the employer told the shaliach, I'm willing to pay 30, and the shliach tells the workers, you're going to get 40, and that's a lie. And they are deeply disappointed. And they say, we wouldn't agree to this unless we got 40. If we would have direct access to the Balabayit, we would negotiate. And maybe he would give us more. Or we would look elsewhere. So when Chazal's deal about teroimis, it is about the perpetuator and not about the victim. So today we discuss Yankov Avinu, and our basic topic started with the Rambam. Yankov HaTzadik Ovid B'Kol Koichoi. The Chiddush is, Yankov had a very nasty employer, and his employer wasn't that honest, and he wasn't that conscientious, and he wasn't that forthcoming. Lovenu Arami, Dazakenim Balei HaToisvis, many other Rishonim Baraturim, and it actually starts in Medrash. The Pasuk already says that Lavan lived in Padan Aram, so why do we need to stress again Lovenu Arami? Arami is the same letters as Ramai, a liar, a cheater, a dishonest person. Lavan took advantage of Yankov. Hichlef es maskorti asora moinim, barafal piken. That didn't affect Yankov's way to treat Lavan. He had a nasty employer that was not fair. But our Torah is Sefer HaYosher, Sefer Yoshua Perek Yud, and once again in Sefer Shmuel. And in Avodah Zorah Chafei, the Gemara says, why is our Torah defined as Sefer HaYosher? Because our Ovis were Yeshorim, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and it is them that we emulate. Sometimes I am deeply disturbed at what's happening in many segments of our society. Nice people, B'nai Torah, and they ask me such outrageous questions. Could I steal from Kupat Cholim? So the other way a person asks me, he has a certain illness and he's entitled to get two portions of medicine every month. I don't know exactly what that medicine was. And he says, I don't really need to, but could I take and sell? And I say, Social Security is about your financial status, and that's Bituach Lomi, but Kupat Cholim doesn't give you medicine to sell. Kupat Cholim is supposed to give you as much medicine as you need. But if you don't need, just because you are entitled to get as much as you need, you can't take more than you need and sell. And these type of questions come to me on a daily basis. And I'm trying to have an ayin toivonti b'malamed schus. In some parts of our society, there's such extreme poverty. And poverty, anias maviros odam al das koinoi al datoi. I hope it's just a result, not of our educational system, but bred and fueled by poverty. But I think a good Jew, a shomer Torah, a Yarei Hashem, should be the most honest person in the world in all his dealings, whether it's individuals or institutions or a municipality or the state. Our Torah is Sefer HaYashar, and our others were Yeshari. And we need to have betochen. Kodesh Baruch Hu is the great provider, and He will provide for us b'derech heter, b'derech koved, without us having to cut corners and be dishonest. The Be'er Goyle was one of the Gedolim 500 years ago, and his commentary on Shulchan Aruch is fundamentally just references, just sources. 4 different sources in Choshe Mishpat, Reish Samach Vov Ba'Shavas Aveda, primarily Shin Mem Ches Hilchos Geneva, Dinei Mazik, Nizkei Momen, and 4 different sources, which is not typical at all, but it goes to great length. And most so, Shin Mem Ches and Choshe Mishpat. And he says, even though Chazal were lenient and sometimes permissive in taking advantage of non-Jews in business, Ta'us Akum. But the Beit HaGodah strongly urges, be honest with everyone, Jew or Gentile. And I have realized, writes the Beit HaGodah, those people that made a fortune out of cheating non-Jews ultimately lost all their gains. And it is only those that were totally honest with everyone they did business with everyone they dealt with, Jew or Gentile, those are the ones that ultimately were successful, and they accumulated wealth. And whenever I quote the Beit HaGodah, I say, it is so important to emphasize who was the Beit HaGodah and what's his life story. In the second Akdama to Beit HaGodah, he explains why he called the Sefer Beit HaGolah. Goyla indicates Goddess. And he says, when I was young, our town was ravaged and ransacked by the Cossacks, and they killed and raped and pillaged and stole, and we had to run away and flee in the middle of the night, and for months we were navenad, without a roof over our heads. And he describes the suffering and the torment and the pain. If anybody had the right to say, yes, take back 1,000th of what they took from us. Yes, take advantage of those Rishon, of those cruel barbarians. It was he, and he finds the moral courage and ethical greatness to say, but we are different. We are Jews. We are Am Hashem. And our Torah is Sefer HaYashar. Regardless of how they treated us, we should be honest in all our dealings. And that is huge. That is real greatness. And to me, it is so admirable. So Yaakov HaTzadik had a nasty employer, but in no way did it affect his integrity and his honesty. And that is what we need to emulate. Especially these days, There are no secrets. We are too big to hide. We could run, but we can't hide. We're too obvious. And too many spotlights on us. And whenever a firm Jew is caught cheating, lying, taking advantage of others, it's a huge chilul Hashem. Besides our tzidkes and our honesty and our integrity, it is an unbelievable chilul Hashem, and it affects others. And it stokes anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism cannot be justified in any way. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to be careful not to magnify and not to encourage anti-Semitism. And therefore, we need to have betochen and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will provide and He will feed. And I don't think HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we should expect and assume that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to make our parnasa in a dishonest way. So you need to trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yankov et Tzadik Ovid Bekol Koich Ulefichach Not L'Schor Yav B'Yoram Azeh Shenemar V'Yifroitzu Ish Ma'od Ma'od. So on top of the Pashas Aman that you say and other gulas for parnasa, bear in mind, this is one of the greatest gulas in parnasa. Be honest, keep your integrity in all your dealings, and you'll have siyata d'shmaya and bracha and shefarav. We should all be zoche b'korah b'yameinu to Yeshua Selam and be as girl tzedek b'mheiro v'yameinu. Amen.